And welcome. My name is Logan S. This is going to be my first ever Pokémon Nuzlocke. Now, I say first ever, I have in the past attempted a couple of them, but I never really followed through and finished them. There was one that I attempted on a vanilla playthrough of Pokémon Emerald, but I wiped before the second gym, so this is going to be my first ever real attempt to complete a Pokémon Nuzlocke. I have been playing Pokemon since I was a little kid, I think first grade in the late 90s. My first ever Pokemon game was Pokemon Yellow. My mom did get me Pokemon Red a little bit afterwards, but I'm an OG. I've been playing Pokemon since it was first popular back in the 90s. For this particular Nuzlocke, I have decided to do my favorite Pokemon game, which is Pokemon Emerald. It is a game that I have loved since it first came out, and I'd also decided that I wanted to randomize this version. I decided to randomize the Pokemon encounters, and for the items to also be randomized. So this is going to be my first attempt. The rules I'm going to follow are not hardcore rules. I am going to do, obviously, the first Pokemon I encounter in an area will be my Pokemon encounter for that area. If I fail to catch it, I cannot try to catch it again. I will use Dupe's Claws, and I will also be using a Death Box, so anytime a Pokemon faints, I have to go and put it in the box, and I can no longer use that Pokemon. I'm also going to try not to overlevel, but I'm not going to follow a strict level cap. So with all that being said, we are well into the video, so let's get started with this Pokemon Nuzlocke challenge. Taking a look at our starter selection, I spend a little bit of time deciding, do I want to go Grumpig or Claydol? I eventually settle on Claydol. I think it can be a really good start for us. So we get in, we're going to be facing this Zigzagoon. I look at our moveset really quickly. Obviously, Confusion is our only move we can really go for right now. So this first fight's not going to be too bad. We take down the Zigzagoon very quickly, get some experience, and save Professor Birch. So from here, we head back to Professor Birch's laboratory, where we are going to give our Claydol its nickname. I ultimately decide on going no Boomies because I really don't want to lose many Pokemon to things like Explosion, which I am sure is not going to be foreshadowing at all. Anyway, Professor Birch tasked us to go and meet our rival May up north, so I head on out of the laboratory and I head up and I decide, you know what, I'm going to look around and get a little sneak preview of what our encounter could be, because I am not going to officially start this Nuzlocke until I have Pokeballs. So I see that we can encounter a Magikarp, which could be good because Gyarados is absolutely amazing, but I head up and we encounter May. I have not really done any training, I just want to see what May has, and she sends out a Kyogre for our first battle. This was the official point that I decided, okay, I'm not starting this officially until I get Pokeballs, because yeah, I'm just not going to be able to defeat that. I'd spend some time trying to grind up our Claydol, run into Regirock, and get hit with our first Explosion. So that is wonderful. Anyway, after leveling up, we head back to take on May with the Kyogre. So after training up, I decide to lower its accuracy a little bit with some Mud Slaps. I know it doesn't do the greatest damage, but I have discovered that if this thing even hits me one time, I'm pretty much getting O-code almost every time. So I lower its accuracy a bit more, rain continues to fall, and now I'm satisfied that yes, we can finally take this thing down. One Confusion is not quite enough. This thing is really bulky right now, especially considering how weak we are. But thankfully, Kyogre misses, and we are able to take down our rival. After that victory, we head back down to the lab where Professor Birch is going to give us our Pokédex, and we are going to get our Pokeballs, which marks the official start of this Nuzlocke. So I head on out. Well, first I check and doubly make sure, yes, I do in fact have Pokeballs. Now it is time for our first encounter. I'm a little nervous. I decide to go over to this grass patch because I have good vibes from it, and our first encounter ends up being a Jigglypuff. How wonderful. Well, I have absolutely no plans of actually using this during this run, but I decided to catch it anyway because, kind of need team members at this point if, the only thing I do is just use it for death fodder. I am actually just so disappointed that we could have had a Magikarp that I don't even nickname this thing. I completely forget. So I head on up north of Old Dell Town to get our next encounter, and this one I'm surprised about. I see a Wigglytuff, and I decide, you know what, with Dupe's Claws, I'm just going to try to capture this thing. If I do capture it, I will probably just use Wigglytuff instead of Jigglypuff, because I figure it could be useful. But after spending way too many potions, getting no boomies into the area where it could faint, I decide, you know what, it's just not worth it. We'll do Dupe Claws, see what our next encounter is, and it is a Heracross. I love Heracross. It is one of my favorite Pokemon, especially for Gen 2. We are able to successfully capture it, and I spend a little bit of time, what am I going to nickname this thing? I recently watched the DC movie Blue Beetle, so I decide this is a Blue Beetle, in fact, so why not? I nickname our Heracross Blue Beetle, and from there, I proceed to try to train it up some, run into this Regirock, which I am deathly afraid of, but I know it's going to Explosion. I switch into no boomies stupidly. Like, if it would have crit, no boomies would have been gone, but anyway, trained up a bit, head on over, get our next encounter, which is going to be this Coughing. I've never been too much of a fan of Coughing, but you know what? I need team members, and that's the whole point of doing a Nuzlocke, is using Pokemon you're not used to using. I nickname it Smokestack. Head on through, train up a bit, and I run into this random trainer with a Salamence. I'm a little bit afraid, but thankfully our No Boomies is able to confusion it all the way down. We then head on in, we talk to our father. Wally wants to get a Pokemon, so I'm like, ooh, is this going to randomize what Pokemon Wally gets? So I follow him along, and it's just your standard Wally getting his Ralts encounter. I do remember that later on he does in fact have randomized teams, so anyway, from there we are able to get our next encounter, which is going to be a Lumbre, which I'm fairly excited about. You know, even though I am a fan of this Pokemon, I've never really used it. I decide, since it's going to become a dancing duck machine, I'm going to name it DDR. And then I run into a Gengar here, which scares me, but anyway. Head on up into the forest for our next encounter, and it is a Mightyena. I don't really know exactly what I'm going to do with this, but Mightyena can be really good. It has Intimidate, so I nickname it Good Girl and proceed to fight. We then run into an Alakazam, which I'm afraid of, but thankfully Good Girl has Bite, and we are able to take it down. But this is where I make my first mistake of this Nuzlocke, and thankfully it's not a big mistake. I completely forget what Shed Ninja is weak to. I, for some reason, only thought it was weak to fire, but then I randomly remembered, wait, this thing is weak to other stuff, so I switch into Mightyena, take it down. Then we run into this Worker, take down this Aqua Grunt, I think it was, and switch around our team a little bit. This is where I make my first big mistake. The battle starts, and I see we are up against a Regirock, which I know at this point has Explosion. I seriously do not want to lose any Pokemon, and I obviously have to have 2 Pokemon in. I'm not going to be able to take this thing down in one turn, so I decide to leave Good Girl in because I think, being a fully evolved Pokemon, she might be able to tank the Explosion, but the Explosion comes in, and we have our first loss of the Nuzlocke. Thankfully, no boomies. I knew he could tank it as long as it wasn't a crit, and he did. But we have to deposit our Good Girl. So I then go to get another encounter, and we run into Gengar, which I really, really like Gengar. It's one of my favorite Pokemon. I do like Haunter slightly more, but that's just for aesthetics. I really hope we can catch this because I think Gengar would be an amazing Pokemon to have going forward. It's got some immunities to it. And thankfully, I don't know what this thing's catch rate is, but I am able to capture it. I decide to name it Good Boy in honor of our Good Girl who just fell. So, from there, I decide to run around training a bit. I challenge this trainer who has a Regi-Ice. I do not like the Regis in this run. And moving forward, whenever I run into a Regi, I'm just gonna nope right on out of there. But I was eventually able to take it down, train up a little bit more in this grass, and we run into a Latios. Good lord, this area is stacked. But I head into Wishmere Cave to get our encounter, find a Noctowl there. Noctowl, another Pokemon that I do like. I'm a huge Harry Potter nerd, so whenever I'm trying to come up with a nickname for this thing, I decide to nickname it Hedwig. And from there, it is just a bunch of grinding to get my Pokemon up to the level that we can face Roxanne. So this is just a few little clips of me going through, training up a bit. I run into a Regice, and like I said, I am just going to nope right on out of there. Train up, Hedwig gets leveled up. I decide to give all the team berries right before we head into our first real challenge of this Nuzlocke, and we challenge the gym leader to try to get our first gym badge. No idea what she's going to lead with, but she sends out a Swalot. I go with no boomies. So I know that this thing's going to go down real quick to a side beam, so I just decide to side beam it, watch the health go down, and it does not OHKO. I kind of thought it would, but oh well, that happens. She decides to use her potions. I decide, fine, we'll go back and forth while you use up all of your potions before I eventually finally take it down. Coming up next is going to be Staryu, and yes, I am switching. I'm not doing a set style. I probably will do a set style Nuzlocke in the future, but I head into our DDR to take it down with some Absorbs. I really hope that we can eventually get some better grass moves for this thing, but I just have to sit here and spam Absorb for a while, but eventually the Staryu was going to go down until I thought I had baited all of her potions out of her, but turns out I didn't. So we trade a few more knocks back and forth, and one more Absorb will take it down. We finally take down her Staryu. DDR gains some experience, and now we are down to her final Pokemon, which is going to be an Electrike. So I decide to switch on over into no boomies to get that ground type in there, so that, you know, if it does have electric type attacks, we don't have to worry about it, and we should be able to take it down really easily with some Mud Slaps. So that's exactly what I do. I just have to spam Mud Slap a few times, and the Electrike eventually goes down. So with that, we are officially past the first real hurdle, getting our first badge. I know Roxanne is not usually considered a difficult fight, but I'm nervous for every one of these big fights. So after we do this, we get our random TM, which ends up being Lovely Kiss, which I probably will not be using at all. Now we have to run through some story stuff. We have to go in here. We have to defeat this Aqua Grunt, which has a Chansey, which is great for some experience. But we take it down. We are able to reunite this Wingull with its owner, and we are now going to be able to sail all the way down to our next spot. So we come in here, meet, I think it's the president. He's going to give us the Pokénav, which is just so much useful in a Nuzlocke, you know that. But I completely forgot that we actually have this rival battle here. And I'm a little nervous, but I decide, you know what, let's go for it. And it actually turns out not to be too bad at all. I don't know why I decided to go with Rock Tom here, but Psybeam takes it down, and her next Pokemon to come out is going to be Phanpy. Doesn't really do much. Blue Beetle is able to take it down. But we take down our rival, and now we can sail across the ocean blue to Dewford Town, or Dewford Island, whatever it is. I do these optional battles against these two fishermen. The second one actually has a Celebi, which kind of scares me a little bit, but overall I know I'm not going to have any problems. Run in here to get our next encounter. I'm excited, and it turns out to be a Raticate. I'm actually a little bit scared of Raticate sometimes. I remember being a kid, there was a trainer who had a Raticate that just obliterated my team, but thankfully this Raticate isn't too difficult to capture. I nickname it Mickey in honor of Mickey Mouse. And then I decided to train up a little bit more, see that we could have had a Tyranitar encounter, which would have been amazing. I love Tyranitar, I've never really been able to use it. So I run around a little bit more. I remember that we can get a fishing rod finally, so that unlocks a few more encounters. So here I immediately encounter a Ralts, which is another Pokemon that I really like. I love Gardevoir, so capture the Ralts, and I decide to run back to the other areas that we can now get an encounter with. I encounter this Dragonair, which I forgot to get Pokeballs, so I only had 2 shots, but thankfully I was able to capture it. Nicknamed it Lucky, And if you want to see what happens in the rest of this playthrough, consider giving me a subscription, because this brings us to the end of the first part of my Nuzlocke experience. Hope you have a great day.